I'm Baratunde Thurston, and this is Clarify. Mike and Spotify have joined together to bring you some of the facts that can help inform your November 8th decision. Today, I'll be sitting down with members of the group La Santa Cecilia, and we'll be talking immigration. The U.S. has the world's largest immigrant population, and right now, right before the election, anti- and pro-immigrant rhetoric is stronger than ever. Mexicans are by far the largest immigrant group, and Mexicans made up 52% of all undocumented immigrants in 2014. Though we've heard a great deal about the U.S.-Mexico border this election, more Mexican immigrants have actually returned to Mexico from the U.S. than have immigrated here since the end of the Great Recession. The slow recovery of the economy and stricter enforcement of U.S. immigration laws at the border may have made the U.S. less attractive to Mexican migrants. So why is immigration such a heated topic in this election? And what are the candidates proposing when it comes to immigration reform? Here's Mike's Natasha Noman. All right, folks, I'm here with Natasha Noman, and we are talking immigration. She is a staff writer for Mike. Hello, Natasha.
Hi, Baratunde. How you doing?
Good to talk to you again. I'm doing well, thank you. I want to start off with this immigration discussion with a broad question, which is why do people immigrate to the United States?
Historically, it's been for better economic opportunity. In recent years, however, that is no longer the primary motivation, in that it has plummeted while simultaneously people fleeing volatility and violence in their countries of origins have increased. That is increasingly over the last, I think, decade or two, has been the motivation for people leaving their countries and coming to America.
Can you talk to me about the threat, perceived or real, of the impact of immigrants in the U.S. on American jobs?
There is a perceived threat which is unfounded in a number of ways. People who say that immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, are a drain on the economy, perhaps do not know that undocumented immigrants pay annually about $12 billion in taxes. They also constitute a substantial amount of the workforce because the demographic of immigrants tends to be of working age as compared to the general American population.
Not a lot of elderly immigrants.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it fits in with the motivation of people coming here for better economic opportunity. As far as a United States economic output is concerned on an annual basis, immigrants are responsible for about almost 15% of that. Mind you, at the same time, the immigrants only constitute around 13% of the population.
So they're slightly overperforming their representation in the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're in a situation where the term immigration reform has been used for decades now.
Yep.
Ronald Reagan is cited as someone who granted amnesty. There are different eras where sort of pacts have attempted to be made in Congress between Republicans and Democrats. What is meant by immigration reform? Why do we need reform of immigration?
I mean, right now it's kind of an unsustainable system. If you have undocumented immigrants who are seeking to become United States citizens, they have to leave, return to their country of origin, and begin an application process, which can take years. And if, for example, you are an undocumented immigrant who's a parent, who has a child who is an American-born citizen, the prospect of returning to your origin country, especially if you've been living in the U.S. for years and this is your home, it can tear apart families. That is not feasible in my mind.
When you talked about the types of people who come to this country increasingly being for more humanitarian reasons, fleeing civil war, etc., Syria comes to mind. And there's been a lot at stake in the refugee crisis and the civil war there affecting Europe very clearly, and fears that it will affect the United States. What are the facts about how many refugees we are taking in? What's involved in screening them? Because there are many people, not to quote Donald Trump, but a lot of people are concerned about their own safety and fears of terrorism and refugees, and it all gets into this big confusing pile. Can you help unconfuse that pile?
Absolutely. Well, I think to do that, we need to break that apart. And the first question I'll address is how many refugees are in the United States. Last month, we celebrated accepting our 10,000th Syrian refugee.
10,000?
10,000th, yeah.
That's not a big number to me.
No, it's not, especially given that more than half of the Syrian population is displaced, which amounts to, I think, around 12 million Syrians. So it's a dramatic increase from the meager number of Syrians we were letting in before 2015, but it's still only 10,000, as you're saying. It's not a lot. On average, America lets in around 70,000 refugees annually.
Okay.
The White House just announced last month that they wanted to, for the year of 2017, fiscal year of 2017, increase that number to 110,000. It's an improvement. It's really still not great, given the number of displaced persons across the world. As far as refugee screening is concerned, it is an incredibly exhaustive process. It demands so many levels of interviews, of background checks. You have to first register yourself with UNHCR, which is the United Nations Refugee Commission. If you look like you're in dire need of fleeing your country, and generally America only accepts the more extreme cases, then you're referred to a resettlement center. Then you have to go through more interviews, literally biometric screening, where they look at your retina and your fingerprints to see if there's any trace of a criminal record. Mm-hmm. Then you have interagency interviews and more background checks, including interviews with Homeland Security. Okay. The list goes on. Yeah. So the chance of someone's, and that's why the number of refugees allowed in is so small, because the process is so exhaustive. Mm-hmm. And the United States is only accepting extreme cases. So the likelihood that a refugee is going to slip through who is secretly part of ISIS or dangerous is just remarkably small, near impossible. So the chance that American is going to die from a refugee and a terrorist attack in America is 1 in 3.64 billion. Okay. So there's
still a chance, is what you're saying.
Yeah. But let's contextualize this. The murder rate in the United States is about 4.5 people for every 100,000 people, which means that the likelihood that I'll get murdered by an American is about 164,000 times higher than the likelihood that I will get killed by a refugee. Wow. So I am a lot more worried about my neighbor than I am about a Syrian refugee coming.
When President Obama was running in 2007, 2008, he promised to take on immigration reform. Mm-hmm. And then he didn't get to it till the second term, and it clearly hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. At the same time, he's promoted executive actions to protect a class of undocumented immigrants while earning the title Deporter-in-Chief for sending back over 2 million people, I believe it is. How do you reconcile and help us make sense of President Obama and immigration?
It's been disappointing. He hasn't lived up to many of the promises he made in his campaigns. I think one thing that sort of distorts the numbers a little bit is, in absolute terms, he's under his presidency, more immigrants have been deported than other presidents. Okay. But this also coincides with soaring numbers of immigrants entering the United States. So proportionally, it isn't as devastating as people think it is. That's not to exonerate him, because it is something, as I said, that disappoints me enormously. But he has done things like DACA and DAPA, taken initiatives to protect immigrants, which, had it not been stalled by the Supreme Court, would have been a real win for immigration reform. Immigration reform has remained the third rail in political discourse and in the public sphere for so long, which is incongruous with the number of people who support allowing undocumented immigrants to become Americans, because that's roughly 2 in 3 Americans who support that. So if you're talking about 2/3, 66% of Americans supporting this policy, it's kind of a bit mind-boggling that it's been so difficult to get this to happen.